Hi guys, welcome to our daily encounter. Today we read in chapter 47 of Genesis this great encounter between Jacob and Pharaoh. And I would have really loved to be there to see Jacob walking up to Pharaoh and meeting him for the first time. This man who comes from the pasture land, a person who was more of a farm type of person, a livestock, a rancher, if you will, standing up before Pharaoh, the ruler of that great empire of Egypt. But he's there and he stands before Pharaoh. And it's interesting that Jacob actually blessed Pharaoh, which was different because usually a person of higher authority would be the one that would pass a blessing onto someone inferior, such as a father to a son. But here Jacob actually blesses Pharaoh, which kind of shows us that Jacob had a high standing, maybe because of his age. This was permittable because of his connection to Joseph, but it might very well have been, and probably was, because God had ordained it that way. And maybe it's even a hint to the fact that Jacob, who would be the patriarch to the great nation of Israel that would grow up there in Egypt, was of a higher nature. And this would have been very significant to the original readers who were actually in the wilderness with Moses, who had just exited out of Egypt, to show that, hey, Jacob, your forefather, the patriarch, was of a higher status than Pharaoh. And I've shown that through the fact that I was his God. And you've seen the mighty miracles and power that I demonstrated to show that you guys are my people. And I hold you even above someone as powerful as Pharaoh. But during this meeting, this encounter, Jacob makes an interesting statement. I really like the way that he describes his life. This is what it says. In verse 8, it says, Pharaoh said to Jacob, "How many years have you lived?" So that's interesting. Maybe Jacob looked so old, he's like, well, how long have you lived? Or maybe he's just making conversation. But nonetheless, in verse 9, so Jacob said to Pharaoh, "The years of my sojourning are 130. Few and unpleasant have been the years of my life." I think this is very significant. It's kind of, it almost takes you back a little bit, because he says that he lived 130 years. Yet he says few and unpleasant have been his years. But there's basically three things about this statement that I think is significant for us as Christians. First, he says the years of my sojourning. In other words, he looked at his life as a sojourning. In other words, this life that he was living was not the final destination. This was the place that he was living at for a while. If anyone knew what sojourning was about, it was Jacob. Jacob was a person who owned livestock. He constantly was moving around to find new land, more pasture for his flock. He was kind of just a wanderer there in the land of Canaan, later to be Israel. But he thought of his life as the same thing. I'm on this earth and I'm just here for a little while, and then I'm going to pass on. I'm going to go somewhere else. And in Hebrews chapter 11, we find that the people of faith saw that as, or were looking forward to, a city, a heavenly city that they were longing for. And they recognized the fact that they were sojourners and exiles on the earth. Jacob had that type of faith. And we should have that faith as well. As we look back on our lives, or even as we look at our lives now, we just recognize the fact that we're just here for a little while. We're here to kind of graze in the pasture land, but then one day we're going to have to move on. We're going to have to move on into the heavenly country that God has prepared for us. And that becomes significant as we look at the other two things that he talks about. So he said that my sojourning are 130. That was the age that he was at this point. And he says, they've been few. The days of his life have been few. Again, 130 years seems like a long time for us, but even if you live 130 years, it'll pass by quickly. And that seems to be true the older you get. When you're 10 years old, when you're a kid, you think, oh, I'm 10 years old, I've been living forever. But when you get to be, middle age and you get past that, you begin to think, you start doing the math and you realize, really, it seems like it's all been just one day. And it's gone by very, very fast. And I'm sure even with Jacob, having lived 130 years, looked back on his life and said, it just seems like one day. It doesn't even seem that long. So for those who want to live forever, who want to live 100 plus years, even if you do so, it's only going to seem like a short time. And that's what it felt like for Jacob. And so what that teaches us is, and it kind of brings more to this idea of sojourning, is the fact that this life is so short. And it does pass by very quickly. And we just have a little bit of time to serve the Lord, to bear fruit for the Lord, to dedicate our lives to God, and to invest in eternity. And however short our life might be, either compared to other people's lives, it's always short compared to eternity. And we're just here for a few years. And that makes then this third statement that he makes a little more bearable, because he says, unpleasant have been the years of my life. You know, it was a rough life, the type of life that they lived. Moving around from place to place, trying to take care of these livestock, living in tents. They didn't find a piece of land and then build a ranch and, you know, have air conditioning. And, you know, they had a very rough life, a very difficult life. And Jacob had not only a rough life in connection to the type of lifestyle he was living, but also he had lost people that were very dear to him. He had lost Rachel. He had lost his father, Isaac. He thought that he had lost Joseph there for a time, and that brought a whole lot of depression and heartache to him. He had a very difficult life, but it's just short and few, the years of his life. And that makes things a little bit more bearable. In the hard times and the difficulties, we can remember these first two things that Jacob mentioned. We're just sojourners on the earth. We're just here for a few years. It might be difficult, it might be hard, but you know what? Good times are to come. One day it will come to the end. We'll look back and we'll say, short and few have been the years of our sojourning. And yeah, it's been unpleasant, but God's got pleasant things prepared for us. Let's just keep pushing forward. Let's hold fast to the Lord. Let's continue to serve him and love him and to give our all for him. And in the end, we'll find eternity before us, an eternity of bliss and just joy and happiness there in the presence of God. He'll tabernacle over us. His presence will be around us, and we'll just enjoy him forever. So let's take this to heart. Let's look at our lives the same way that Jacob looked at his. We're just sojourners, just here for a little while. No matter how long we live, it's just a few years. And yes, it is unpleasant. There's a lot of difficulties that come, but when we think about the fact that we are sojourners and that life is so short, perhaps it can be a little bit more bearable. So that, guys, I do thank you for watching the video today. Hope you guys have a great day. Love you guys. God bless.